Thank you, Sue, and thanks all of you for your patience whilst we worked out what we were doing there. It's wonderful, isn't it, technology, until it goes wrong. So we're going to be talking about a risk-based approach to organisational well-being. Now, I would like this to be as interactive as possible. So we know the chat box sometimes doesn't work. So if I ask you a question, could you pop the answer in the Q&A box instead? So you should find on your toolbar there's a button saying Q&A. So if you've got any comments, any questions, anything that you'd like to input as we go through, please do pop it in there. Robert, you've got your hand up. Do you want to pop your question in the Q&A box, or are you just experimenting with raising your hand? Who knows, but just pop anything that you want to say in the Q&A box, and I'll keep an eye on that as we go through, and obviously I'll try and take some input from there as well, because I would like to hear from you. I've deliberately lowered the number of slides that I normally do because I wanted to make this relatively interactive, because you've got quite a small group of people here, so I'm hoping that is going to work out for you all. So as Sue said, I'm Heather Beach, and I've had a quick look at the participants here, and there are lots of you that I don't know. So hello. I was, up until 7 years ago, I was running Barber. I don't know whether any of you are old enough to remember Barber Microfiche, but I ran that, and then I took it online. And I also ran Safety and Health Expo, IOSH Conference, and SHP magazine. So I've got actually a 30-year career in health and safety, but I've also run large teams and small teams in that period as well. So I'm very familiar with the sort of the HR challenges too of having big and small teams. 7 years ago, I founded Healthy Work Company. I started a master's in applied positive psychology and some organizational qualifications too, because what I really wanted to do was support organizations in using well-being as a business enabler, really. And I think we haven't really got there yet. We're starting to get there, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about where we've come from and where I'm hoping that we're going to be moving to as we go forward. But fundamentally, I believe that well-being is a cultural issue. It's holistic, it's cultural, and it should be looked at as a business risk and a business opportunity. And so I'm going to be looking at well-being as a business risk and opportunity as we move forward through this. I have written a book. It's called I'm a Boss, Not a Shrink. It's a practical guide to manage your well-being conversations. It came out last year. So it's available on Amazon if anyone is interested in buying it. And I founded Women in Health and Safety as well, which is still going strong. We've got about 4,500 members. If you're not a member of Women in Health and Safety, pop in the Q&A box, and I can always send you over a link after the session, or send you my email so that you can get in contact with me. So let's have a think about this first and foremost. Are our workplace wellbeing strategies working? So if I had a quid for every person that rings me and says, I don't know if our strategy is working. For example, I'm not sure if mental health first aid is working for us, or I'm not sure whether our wellbeing strategy in general is working, I would be quite wealthy, because fundamentally, I think the problem that we had was that we didn't ask when we started workplace wellbeing, what are we trying to achieve? So for example, lots of people put mental health first aid programs in place because lots of people were doing it, and it seemed like a good idea, and it was something that would show that you were prioritizing well-being, but we didn't really think about what we were trying to achieve. And because we didn't think about what we were trying to achieve, we really didn't have anything to measure at the end of it either. However, I would have said that if we think about what problem we were trying to solve, perhaps it was destigmatizing conversations about having mental health issues. So certainly mental health first aid programs, mental health awareness sessions have all helped with that. And I think we're definitely seeing some success in that, it's become a lot more acceptable to be able to talk about your mental health at work. Particularly younger generation have no issues talking about it at all. Having a mental health day, taking a day off your mental health would have been sort of something we never would have thought of before. And now we are actually able to do that. So if that was what we were trying to do, I think we are seeing some success. If also it was raising awareness about mental ill health and how to self-manage, then I also think we're seeing some success. I've seen over the last 7 years a big shift in people's awareness of the sorts of things they need to put in place to manage their own stress, manage their own resilience. Are we less stressed? Possibly not, but we sort of know the things that we should do. Whether we do them or not is another matter. But I remember when I started out 7 years ago and I stood in front of groups of people and asked them things like, what do you proactively do for your own well-being? They looked at me as if I was a bit mad. Whereas now that's a question that almost everyone has an answer for and has thought about. If, however, our intentions with our workplace well-being programs were to reduce sickness absence, to retain staff, to attract staff, to engage people in our teams, then we're almost certainly failing. That's certainly what the latest statistics in this field would actually show us. So the current status, well, we've got a record 2.6 million people not working due to long-term sickness in the UK in July 2023. Record, almost double what it was the previous 2 years previously. In 2019, we had 1.97 million people economically inactive for this reason. That was a previous record. In the past, people were not working, often because they had caring responsibilities. Now, they tend to not be working. Yes, caring responsibilities are an issue. Long COVID is also an issue, but there's an awful lot more mental health related issues out there, which mean that people are just not in work because their mental health is too poor. Now, the second factor that would make me believe that actually we're not doing very well in this field is the number of people that are currently taking an antidepressant. So SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They are often prescribed for anxiety or depression, mixed anxiety and depression, not for every mental illness. And also, not everybody that goes to the GP and gets diagnosed with anxiety and depression gets an SSRI. And we also know that there are many people that don't even go to the doctor, so don't get prescribed an SSRI. But of those that have been to the GP and have a diagnosis of anxiety or depression or another mental health issue, which may be supported by or improved by taking an antidepressant, there is an enormous number of us. 13% of us, 12.8, in fact, 12.8% of us are taking an SSRI. So that is 1 in 8 of the population, 1 in 8 of us. And I think that figure is absolutely astounding. That means that 1 in 8 of us has a diagnosis of anxiety or depression and is currently taking medication. And then we have the engagement figures. So according to Gallup, 59% of employees around the world are currently quiet quitting. So they're disengaged. They're doing their 9 to 5, rocking up, not really interested, not really prepared to, or interested in going the extra mile for their organization, not really caring about their work. Now, there's an argument to say that obviously some of us are obsessed by our work, and that isn't a good thing either. However, being engaged in what we're doing helps us actually maintain our well-being, and it also supports productivity, creativity. Everything for the organization is improved by having engaged employees. So we know that we have got a problem right now, and whatever we've been doing in the workplace well-being arena has not been helping. It's helped destigmatize mental health issues. It's helped us become more aware of what we need to do as individuals to look after ourselves better, but it hasn't helped the overall picture of sickness absence, staff retention, staff engagement, those things that we might have thought we were trying to impact before we'd actually worked out exactly what we were trying to achieve. So what is organizational well-being all about? Is it about destigmatizing conversations about mental health? Is it about providing further support when people are struggling? Or is it more than that? Now, I would suggest that the way we've tackled the issue to date has been focusing on those two issues up front. destigmatizing conversation about mental health, providing further support when people are struggling. That's sort of what we've been doing. Hence, we've also recruited a lot of wellbeing managers who are quite a low level in an organization quite often and can coordinate activity, but can't really make a difference to the culture of the organization. So let's have a look at what it might be if it's more than that. So this is the journey of where we've been and where we've come from. So when I started this business in 2017, we were at the second stage there. We were at the mental health first aid stage. Prior to that, well-being was seen as the purview of HR benefits teams. And it was things like cycle to work schemes. It was yoga on a Friday. It was fruit. It was, dress down. It was those sorts of things. And it very much came from an HR perspective. Then mental health first aid came in, and mental health first aid was sort of taken on by both health and safety and HR professionals, and it really took the UK by storm. It came out of Australia, and when I went to Australia and interviewed some people in organizations who were quite large, they said that at that time, 5 years ago, mental health first aid had kind of been and gone in Australia. They'd done it and come out the other side now. And I think we're sort of getting to that place in the UK as well. I was always a little bit concerned about the fact that we didn't really have appropriate governance for mental health first aid in organizations. And we were also often training our managers to be mental health first aiders. And in fact, your manager duties are quite significantly different to those of a mental health first aider. And I believe that actually we should be focusing first and foremost on training our managers, because they should be the first port of call when someone is struggling with their mental health. They should be the people who are pointing out that that person actually possibly shouldn't be working because perhaps they're not safe to be working, for example. They should be the person that's looking at reasonable adjustments with that individual and with HR. So I think that manager training should have come in first before mental health first aid. However, we've done it the way we've done it. Now lots of people are looking at manager training and they are understanding that it's different to mental health first aid. So that is sort of a new-ish thing which started pre-COVID and is now most organizations are looking at that or have done it. Then we looked at, during the pandemic, we just wanted to make people feel better. So there was sort of COVID specific interventions, training on managing your resilience, sending people packages home so they felt a bit better, coffee mornings to make people make sure they were stayed connected. And then some organizations actually looked at doing things such as giving people extra holiday, or that then mutated into perhaps meetings free Friday, that sort of thing, which are a little bit more systemic in nature. We came out of COVID, and at the same time as we came out of COVID, there was the release of ISO 45003. So ISO 45003, in case you haven't heard about it, is the new wellbeing standard which came out of ISO. It's an accompanying standard to 45001, although you can take it separately now. That's a new development. And it basically looks at the over and above the normal health and safety risks in your organization. It looks specifically at psychosocial risk. So stress risk, psychosocial risk. It looks at what are the risks in your organization when it comes to stress. And those are going to be different from organization to organization. That was a bit of a game changer. Although lots of people haven't taken it on yet, it did actually make people realize that actually stress risk assessment is a legal requirement in the UK. And in fact, perhaps there is a benefit to starting to look at well-being more from a stress risk assessment perspective. Now, where I see organizations is that they're aiming to look at a well-being risk assessment or a sustainable cultural approach, which is much, much more difficult, but will ultimately bring much greater rewards than mental illness destigmatization, than just looking at people's physical health. It's a much more business-focused approach. It's focused on risks and it's focused on opportunities. So it's something that, again, you're going to have to involve your senior team in. Whereas you can do these mental health first aid type interventions, you can even do manager training without your senior team really having oversight. When it comes to creating a strategy based on risk assessment or a sustainable cultural approach, your senior team are absolutely integral to being involved in that conversation. So I don't know whether anybody here has seen the Parker Hudson safety ladder, the maturity curve for health and safety. Well, this is the one that we've created for wellbeing. So it sort of looks at the same ideas, but it actually just looks at it from a wellbeing perspective. So here is your first opportunity to be involved. I'm going to go through each of these steps, and then I'm going to ask you where you think you are as an organization. I ran a conference back in November last year, and we put this up on the wall, and everybody put their post-it notes where they thought they belonged. And I can tell you that most people were actually quite a lot further down than I would have thought. Actually, I think this whole systemic cultural approach is quite new. So the bottom of that level is reactive. So reactive means that somebody is sick and we are helping them. So we're supporting them back to good health, we're supporting them back to work, we are providing them with an employee assistance program, for example, counselling, financial advice, legal advice. We've got mental health first aiders to spot that someone is struggling. We have occupational health. Some people might have online GP, especially if you're in a country where it's quite difficult to get hold of your GP. But this is reactive. Someone is already struggling and we are stepping in to support that individual. The next sort of step up is awareness. So that's building people's awareness of themselves, how they can self-manage. So that might be mental health and resilience training, understanding yourself better, understanding where stress comes from and how to look after yourself better. It might be physical health kiosks. A lot of organizations will put those in place where you can tell someone's got high blood pressure or they are pre-diabetic or whatever that might look like. It might be running awareness days around the times of the year when we are thinking about, for example, Stress Awareness Day or menopause month, or, you know, it might be running campaigns around those areas, but it's still awareness building. So we're moving from reactive to awareness building. That's the next step up. Then we move to proactive. Proactive is starting to think about how do we prevent stress in our organization? So it's all very well to train someone to look after themselves. It's all very well to pick them up when they fall. But if we're creating the conditions in which they're going to fall over, if we're creating the conditions in which they are going to suffer from stress, in a sense, we're not really doing ourselves any favors. So what we're trying to do in this proactive quadrant here is think about what causes stress in this organization, put proactive measures in place to ensure that people are in the best place they can be in our organizations. That will often start with your manager training. So a lot of organizations have started on this now. So this might be training them how to have good conversations with someone struggling, which is what my book is about. And also we train a lot in this area using forum theatre as an example of a good conversation and a bad conversation. Often then you may want to look at your manager behaviours that you expect. So we know that managers are a huge part of our well-being at work, and often they are not recruited or promoted for their managerial skill. They're recruited or promoted because they're very good operationally at the job. So what we're looking at here is what behaviors do we expect from our managers, and then promoting, recruiting, performance managing with those behaviors in mind. So for example, it might be, you know, authenticity, trust. It might be, I don't know, clarity. These sorts of things, honesty. We might have a list of characteristics, a list of behaviors of what we expect. Our training, our awareness campaigns will be more in line with the demographic risks that we have. So for example, if we have a lot of men in the organization, we might be doing some specifics around male mental health. We might also be doing sessions on managing menopause for the women in your teams, that sort of thing. We might be looking at more health kiosk type stuff. We might be looking at also, when it comes to demographic, we might be looking at role. So we might be thinking about, for example, fatigue training or violence and harassment, bullying, those sorts of things. So when we're thinking about its demographic and job risks, we might be training in line with that. At this point, we hope we also have a basic stress risk assessment in place, not an individual one, but an organizational one. And a basic stress risk assessment you can formulate off the back of your HR engagement survey. So we're going to have a look at what stress risk assessment looks like in a moment, organizational stress risk assessment. But it essentially looks at what are the stress risk factors in your organization. So are you an organization with very high demands, with very high workloads? Are you a 24/7 operation, for example, where there's a huge strain on people? That could be a stress risk. Are you an organization that has traumatic content that you're exposed to? For example, a journalist or in the media, that's a stress risk. So having a basic organizational stress risk assessment in place would be proactive. And then we'd have some reporting against those measures. So we know that we have these stress risks. We've done some manager training, we're reporting against those, so we've got some measures of success in place. Perhaps we're looking at our employer assistance program and its utilization. So again, we're measuring a little bit. That's proactive. Finally, we've got generative. So this comes back to that holy grail, which is also the same in the Parker-Hudson safety culture model. Your reporting when you're generative is in line with your business risks. So for example, we might have a business risk and a business opportunity around engagement. So we might be measuring engagement. We might be measuring retention, staff retention. We might be measuring productivity. So where are our risks and our opportunities, and how can our wellbeing program impact those? So our reporting will be in line with how successful we're being when it comes to those business risks that we have decided to tackle. So, and it might be as simple as, so one of my customers, they did a stress risk assessment and they worked out that they had 3 specific things they wanted to tackle. One of those was that balancing performance with care for managers. They felt that managers were too performance driven and that they didn't really have empathetic conversations with their teams. There was very variable input from that perspective. So they've been measuring that on the HR engagement survey. So that's the sort of thing that we're looking at. When you're generative, your senior team is most definitely involved, because your senior team is deciding what projects they're going to take on, which organizations they're going to partner with, all of which are things which create stress. They're going to be role modeling or not, good well-being or not. They are going to be, they're setting the tone effectively, and they have to be involved when you're looking at a generative approach to well-being. And your cultural programs will actually be looking at all of these and how they intersect. So they'll be looking at your engagement program and how that intersects with well-being. They'll be looking at your EDI program and how that intersects with well-being. ESG or other environmental measures, they'll be looking at how that intersects with well-being. Maybe they have a new culture and values, one of which is, say, we care. So how does that intersect with your wellbeing program? Everything on that basis is integrated. You don't have a separate wellbeing strategy which sits outside of everything else. Right, now here's your turn, and I can see one person's popped something in. Please let me know, where are you? A lot of people said when they were at my conference, they were between awareness and proactive. So if you're between two, put between awareness and proactive. Or if we have someone on this call which is generative, I can't wait to hear it. If you think you're still reactive, pop that in the Q&A box. So let's have some feedback now. Just pop in the Q&A box which you think your organization is. Is it reactive, awareness, proactive, generative, or between two? And I'm just going to have a look at what I've got coming in there so I can see. Right, okay, so Hugh is reactive. Trevor, between awareness and proactive. Awareness, says Helen. Whoa, Chris, you're generative. Whoa, that's amazing. Lovely to hear. Chris, let us know. Have you got ISO 45003? Just pop it in the Q&A box, please. Awareness, says Alice, and Anonymous says between two. John, reactive and awareness, between reactive and awareness, between awareness and proactive. Right, so yes, so only one on generative, but most of you are sort of on your way up that curve, and it sounds like you're at least aware. Hi, Lauren, between awareness and proactive. Awareness, as Usman, Susan, Tony. Gail says, hard to get HR to think beyond policies. Yes, that's where you come in, Gail. If you get to listen to you, mind you, I know that's not always easy. And HR and health and safety have to work together on this one, because they are going to probably drive, but you also need a input. Oh, Chris, you were the first company globally to achieve it. Fantastic. I'd like to connect with you and have a chat and see what you're measuring and how it's working out for you. Thank you so much. Becky says awareness and some aspects proactive. So possibly work to do, it sounds like, for everybody there. Thank you very much for sharing. Very, very good to see all of that. Okay, what is workplace wellbeing? So we know there are many, many definitions, right? As there are many definitions for the term resilience, there are many definitions for the work for well-being and workplace well-being as well. I like the ILO. So the ILO say workplace well-being relates to all aspects of working life, from the quality and safety of the physical environment to how workers feel about their work, their working environment, the climate at work, and work organization. The aim of measures for workplace well-being is to complement OSH measures to make sure workers are safe, healthy, satisfied, and engaged at work. And if that isn't an argument for health and safety being involved in well-being, I don't say they need to own it, but they need to be involved. This is it, isn't it? We think about well-being or healthy work in this example as a holistic and also a moving thing. So it's what we call a relational concept. So we're well in relation to our environment, we're well in relation to our manager, and then we're well in relation to what's going on with ourselves. So we know, don't we, that as an individual, we can go into an organization, we can feel great, we can feel like we're really, we're self-aware, we're doing really well. Then we can go into an organization which can absolutely destroy us because there are lots of things in place which make that a toxic work environment. Or we might end up working with a manager that makes us feel really awful, and therefore we end up feeling like we're not necessarily well. So all of those three things interact. So me as an individual, what's my self-awareness like? What's my self-regulation like? How much do I understand how to manage my own stress? What's going on in my life? Am I getting divorced? Am I moving house? Have I got a child with issues? Am I caring for elderly parents? I have a big part to play in this workplace well-being thing, don't I? Then there's my manager, my relationship with my manager, which is fundamental to my experience of work. And then there's the organization. What kind of resources have I got in place? What kind of demands? How is change managed? Is my role clear? Lots of those things that come from the HSE and their stress risk factors. All right. I've got a couple of things in there that I'm going to answer at the end, I think. Thanks, John and Lauren. I'm going to have a look at those later. So redefining workplace wellbeing. I think a lot of us started to do the initiatives that we did because we thought we were doing the right thing. And it is about doing the right thing. There is a moral aspect to this for sure. It is a human issue. We all want to be well. We all want to be happy. We all want to work in organizations where people are well and happy. We all want to manage teams that are well and happy. So yes, it is the right thing to do. Also, yes, it's right to destigmatize conversations about well-being. It's right to provide that tertiary support as well. But let's move it on a step now. Let's look at well-being through a lens of your opportunities and business risks when it comes to your people. Let's ensure that our cultural programs all tie together. For example, safety. Well-being and safety, Huge link between them. We know we're not necessarily safe if we're unwell. EDI, or DEI, however you choose to call it in your organization, that's equality, diversity, inclusion, absolutely ties together. ESG, we know that S particularly actually fits into well-being, and the S really fit in together, don't we? Well, we'll start reporting on that, and actually well-being measures can fit into your S reporting for ESG. So what questions should we be asking? What are the health risks for our demographic? Musculoskeletal disorders, disability? Do we have an aging workforce? Do we have a risk of suicide or traumatic events? So a number of the organizations that I work with have a high risk of suicide. So people go there specifically to try and take their own lives. Therefore, we've looked at suicide first aid. We've also done some traumatic events training with them. So TRIM, or a flavor of TRIM. What business risks could we address with our wellbeing program? What would we really like to tackle? Is sickness absence a huge issue for us? One organization that I work with has sickness absence so high, their group income protection program amount of money has gone up so much, and they know that it will continue to rise unless they do something about it. So sickness absence might be a business risk for you. Maybe you're not retaining staff, good staff. Maybe you're retaining too many, but the people that have been there a long time, you maybe want to change a little bit, but staff retention, you're retaining those good people. What opportunities have you got? Perhaps in an age of very high employment, you might want to consider being an employer of choice. So how do you get to be an employer of choice? Well, you might look at some of those areas that impact someone's well-being at work, not just destigmatization, not just benefits programs, but also being an organization that your friend would recommend that you work there because it's such a great organization to work in. That's the sort of thing you're looking for, that net promoter score. And that net promoter score will come from the deep cultural issues within your organization. How am I managed? Do I have the resources to do my job? Am I paid fairly? Do I feel it's a good place to work? It might be engagement, it might be productivity. These might be business opportunities. Where does this fit into our other cultural initiatives? Safety culture, so accident investigation. Do you routinely ask people questions about their well-being when there's been an incident, accident, near miss? Or is it something that you only do in a really serious incident? Is it very sort of formulated, your accident investigation? Or have you got like empathetic conversational style? Is it a no blame culture? Are you looking at just culture? That all fits with wellbeing too. Engagement initiatives, that all fits with HR, EDI and ESG, I've already mentioned. So you're probably seeing here that this cannot be tackled by an individual. So those organizations that have brought a wellbeing manager on board, what do you want your wellbeing manager to do? Are they there to coordinate your wellbeing program? Fine. Or are they there to actually make a difference to your wellbeing results? In which case, you probably want them to be very senior, or to be sitting alongside the board, or to have a board person that actually sponsors that and is really close to what's happening there. What data can we use to inform our focus? So how do we know what to do? Sickness absence, maybe we know why, maybe we don't know why, maybe it's really high, but that's something that we can look at. Referrals to occupational health, engagement surveys, really rich vein there of data around well-being. Some people will add a question, does the company care about my well-being? And think, oh, we've now got a well-being survey. You had a well-being survey before, because your engagement and well-being are very, very closely linked. So if relationships with managers are included in your engagement survey, that's data for your stress risk assessment, because that's well-being data. Are you retaining staff? Are you retaining the right staff? What about grievances? Are there common themes coming out from grievances? Employee assistance program data, is it being utilized? Are there any, quite often it's all completely anonymous and you don't get any data at all, but is there any data you can get from your EAP which might inform your focus? Safety, as I said, well-being, safety, intrinsically linked. I don't think well-being has been looked at through the lens of safety risk very much, but it is there. And then organizational stress risk assessment. Have you done one? Can you create one? Can you use employee forums? How can you put an organizational stress risk assessment together? We must engage the senior team. And to engage the senior team, we need to understand their business and human levers. What's their appetite to solve these? My conference in November, Becky Corris from Heathrow Airport spoke, and Becky and I worked on their wellbeing strategy together. She did the hard, heavy lifting, and she sold it in to her senior team. The way she sold it in was to meet with every single one of them individually and understand what their business levers were, what their key concerns were, what their key risks were, how she could appeal to them on a human level. And she then created the presentation around those levers, and hence she got everything that she asked for because she did that. What human imperatives are there? How can they lead by example? So have they done self-awareness training? Are they aware of the sorts of things that they do which actually encourage poor well-being or encourage good well-being? What kind of culture do they want to create? Where does care fit into that? Where does well-being fit? So one of my clients, I said earlier, I think, yeah, they wanted to balance performance and care because they saw themselves as being very performance driven and their managers as being very performance driven. And they wanted to actually bring in an element of care into that. So they have now got a we care pillar as part of their overall mission and values. Right, now, let's see. Let's have a little poll. Is this a poll? No, this isn't a poll. This is just a shove it in the chat box, in the Q&A box, please, if possible. I think this isn't the poll, is it? Let me just have a quick look. I haven't got the poll. Have you, Sue?
It's who is responsible.
Who's responsible? That's later. Thank you.
That's later.
Got it.
Okay.
Okay. Right. So if you could just pop in the chat box, please. And I know at least one of you has definitely done an organizational stress risk assessment. Otherwise, they would not have got ISO 45003. But who here has done an organizational stress risk assessment with multiple inputs? For example, maybe you've done an HR engagement survey, had your senior team review, maybe done some employee forums, maybe built in some MHFA feedback in. Have you done one that's got multiple inputs? Have you done a fairly basic stress risk assessment, which is fairly generic? For example, you've taken it from your HR engagement survey, or one of my customers takes it from industry. They look at what the industry stress risks are and they build their stress risk assessment around that. Or perhaps you've just done individual stress risk assessment, which is not a legal requirement, but can be useful. So perhaps if someone's off sick or if someone's struggling with their well-being, you might have sat down with them individually, or a HR team sat down with them and gone through what stresses them out, how to communicate with them, what sort of signs there will be that they are stressed. That is an individual stress risk assessment, not a legal requirement, can be useful. An organizational stress risk assessment is a legal requirement. Or have we done none of the above? Right, I'm going to have a look now. Only 7 of you have answered, but please can I have some more answers, please? Chris, I'll find you on LinkedIn. Joanne, I have created a stress risk assessment based on the management standards. Joanne, can you pop in the Q&A box? What have you used to create your stress risk assessment? Just interested to see what people are using. I don't mean tool, I mean what inputs. So has it come from HR engagement survey? Has it come from employee forums? How have you created those? How have you identified what those stress risks are? Gail, no. Claire, yes. Yes to what? Which one? Let me know. So Shelley, organizational stress risk assessment with generic one based on management standards, the input from HR, but also on second year of issuing a mental health and wellbeing survey. That sounds very, very good. Only 30 staff as well. Sounds like you're doing really well there. So Helen, individual stress risk assessments. Robert, basic from HR engagement survey along with the individual one. Excellent. Claire, only individual stress risk assessments. Ellis, organizational stress. Just starting our process to draw up. Oh, Claire, thank you. You're interested in women and health and safety. I think what I'll do is I'll pop my email address on the last slide and then you can just email me and I can send you the link to join. Right, of course it does, Chris. So it's provide the framework for the risk assessment, multiple inputs. So you're at the generative end. You've got across the organization, HR, EDI, and now creating balance groups. Brilliant. Gender, ability, etc. Right. Basic only outlined in our safety statement. Okay, so in the main there, a lot of work to do. Some of you have started, some of you have, obviously one of you's done a load of stuff, and one in a small organization has done a lot. The rest of you have either done something very generic or nothing yet. It's actually a legal requirement to do a stress risk assessment. And it's not really been enforced by HSE. They keep threatening to enforce it. Apparently it's going to get enforced in the next 18 months, according to those in the know. But whether it will, I don't know. But it just makes sense, because until you know what stresses people out in your organization, what stressors you are creating for people, you can't start to design those out or mitigate. And therefore what you're doing is you're just providing them with PPE effectively by giving them resilience training, and actually then popping them back into an environment which actually doesn't support their well-being potentially. So it makes sense to do it. It's not only a good idea from a legal perspective, it just makes sense. So yes, stress risk assessment's a legal requirement in many countries. It's actually getting enforced in some countries now. So Australia have become very enforcement focused on it. Scandinavian countries, some of those, Belgium, France, Netherlands, these sorts of, a lot of countries are getting a lot more enforcement focused when it comes to a stress risk assessment. The UK, as I say, we've threatened to get enforce it. If someone in your team went to the HSE and said, look, there've been loads of cases of stress here, then they might well come out and see you. But it just makes sense. It just makes sense. So how are you going to get inputs for that to be able to create a stress risk assessment? And by the way, you can absolutely use the management standards to do that. If you just do a Google for management standards, you'll find the HSE management standards, you'll find a sort of an approach there. You'll find a description of each of the 6 factors that you're supposed to look at. And then you can actually find out what those stressors are by, for example, looking at your HR engagement survey, by doing an actual assessment. For example, what somebody was saying there, they're doing a wellbeing survey. You might, for example, use employee forums. So somebody like me, I quite often go into organizations, get groups of people together and actually ask them, what do they love about working here? What really frustrates them? What could be done better? And from that, we can pull out a stress risk assessment. You might get feedback from grievances and exit interviews. The senior team might have a view. And then finally, what's happening with one of my clients at Luton Airport is they're using their managers to collect this data. So we've trained about 160 managers at Luton over the last 9 months. And within that training, we're also incorporating how to run a session with your team to establish their stress risk factors. And then here's a template, and then up it goes to the wellbeing manager called Sam, who's just won a couple of awards actually for her approach here. And then she's building the stress risk assessment off the back of their feedback and input. So lots of different opportunities and options for gathering this data, and just start. That's the point. You don't have to have it perfect with multiple inputs first time around, but if you build something and then gradually build up your inputs as time goes on, you'll get richer data which you can then measure. Right, here we have our polls. So are you going to do this for me? So who is responsible for well-being in your organization? Is it a well-being manager? Is it HR? Is it health and safety? Is it a team which actually includes HR and health and safety, and perhaps comms, and perhaps another lead of something? Or is it another function? Let's see what you have to say here. Yep. So, can we end that and share the results, please, Sue?
Yes, got 29 out of 36 people have participated so far, so that's great. So a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to end that. and I'll share the results now.
Lovely. Well, I mean, I think that's really, really good news, because the majority of you, it's a team, and it has to be a team. You know, it really worries me when someone says, oh, that's the wellbeing manager, or oh, that's HR, or that's health and safety, because HR can't manage it on their own. Health and safety can't manage it on their own. And a wellbeing manager can't really manage it on their own. It has to be a team-based approach, because all you're going to be doing is a bunch of interventions if it's just HR, just health and safety, and it's not going to be based on a holistic cultural approach, which is, in an ideal world, what we should be doing. So I'm not saying interventions are unhelpful, and we know that they can make a difference, but what are you trying to achieve with those? How are you measuring them? How do they actually relate to your business risks and opportunities? That really has to be a team. So HR, for example, are going to be providing a lot of the data to build your stress risk assessment, but health and safety, really, they should be building that stress risk assessment, and because they know how to do risk assessments, and HR don't. By the way, if anyone is interested, I run a course, which we've run 4 of, and it's been full so far, with Peter Kelly on how to create a stress risk assessment for your organization. So if anyone's interested in that, again, I'll pop my email address at the end here. Just drop me an email. It's an open course. Anyone can come. And we've had a lot of engagement in that so far. People wanting to learn how to build an organizational stress risk assessment. Because although health and safety normally runs risk assessments, this is slightly different. So we're building a bit of competence for people in that area. So yeah, and also there's also the link between well-being and safety. So health and safety have to be involved. And yeah, so really I'm really glad to see that most of you have a team, and you'd also probably want your comms person, your internal comms person on that team as well. We must do it together, not in a silo. So you might want to consider a RACI matrix to help you to identify that. So who does each job, who actually coordinates, who actually is accountable, who's consulted, who's kept informed, can be a useful way of actually identifying. Because otherwise, if you don't have any coordinating point like a wellbeing manager, there can be quite a lot of issues in that area. So one of my clients, I actually operate as their virtual wellbeing manager, because health and safety and HR sort of sit outside that, and I bring them together regularly. We work out who's doing what and what's working and what's not working. So you do need someone who actually makes things happen, but equally you need a number of people who influence and are informed and consulted on it too. So I want a little guess for you now in the Q&A section. What percentage of our well-being at work do you think is down to our relationship with our manager? This is new research from February 2023. Just pop in the Q&A box now what you think the answer is. 75, says Martina. If you think it's lower or higher than that, just pop in what percentage you think it is. 50, says Richard. 60, Trevor says 90. 40, 80, 80. Oh, lots of 80s there, lots of 80s. 70. Well, Susan, you're almost spot on. It's actually 69%. So this is research from February 2023. It's a bit suspicious because another survey, I think it's Gallup, says that 69% of engagement is down to the manager as well. So poor old managers, they've got an awful lot to deal with now, haven't they? And they need ongoing training and development. It is really tough being a manager these days. You know, when I started work, everything was command and control. You did what you were told. And now it's much more difficult. It's engagement, it's learning from failure, it's looking at inclusion and how you flex your style to actually work with an individual's preferences. Really, really difficult. They must have investment and take some of the work away from them so that they can actually coach, develop and lead, rather than actually expecting them to continue to do the work and be a manager. It's really, really difficult. And I think a behavioural framework for managers is a good idea, something to work with your HR team on. What do you expect from managers? When you're bringing in these cultural programs, it's then looking at what the impact on the behaviours that you're expecting is going to be. So the size of the prize. So if we get, this is quite old data actually, it's 2018 and it's being updated at the moment, but reactive interventions. So if we look at those aspects where we're just bringing people back to work or when they're struggling, you get £3.40 for every pound you spend. Proactive support, you get £5 back for every pound you spend, and proactive interventions, which are more cultural initiatives. So actually in the Deloitte classification, a proactive intervention would be manager training, for example. So anything that affects your culture would be a proactive intervention. So just some examples of people that I've worked with here. And what I want to say is that nobody works in exactly the same way. So there isn't a one size fits all approach. So when I went to work with Gain, for example, a few years ago, they had an HR engagement survey they were running annually. And we made a couple of amendments to that. And I know there's not a huge number of changes you can make because it's measured year to year, isn't it? But we amended a couple of the questions, and that made it suitable to create a stress risk assessment off the back of it. And then we used employee forums to gather more data on some of the points which were considered to be potential stressors. London Array, we did, it's sort of similar. We did a wellbeing survey at London Array, and then we followed that up with employee forums. What I thought was interesting is that the survey gave quite different results to what the employee forums gave. The employee forums really can create quite rich data. If we can manage those really well and actually get some really rich feedback from people, we can get some very, very good data out of that. And that gave some absolute steers to the senior team on some changes that they need to make. And they did make those. As I said, Luton Airport, their stress risk assessment is being created through manager engagement. So managers are getting feedback from the teams and then rolling that up to wellbeing, and wellbeing are putting the stress risk assessment together. Keolis Amy Docklands, this is a year old now, this program. So a year ago, we did a stress risk assessment. We created a wellbeing strategy off the back of that stress risk assessment. We had 3 pillars for that wellbeing strategy. 2 out of the 3 we've seen quite a good success with. So when we ran the engagement survey this year, there was quite a big uptick in the results. The third one is much more difficult and systemic. So we've started an actual campaign to be able to address that one as well. But we've created a strategy off the back of stress risks, business risks, and we're measuring the outcome of those. Right, so just an invitation here. Yes, that's my email address on the bottom. If you want to belong to Women in Health and Safety, or you want more information about the stress risk assessment course I run with Peter Kelly, please do pop an email to me and I'll send you whichever details that you want. We are running a free webinar this Thursday. We've got about 300 people registered, and it's about avoiding overwhelm and burnout, because that is the biggest risk that we're seeing at the moment in organizations, is the fact that everyone's overwhelmed. So we've created a systemic approach to that, which we're running with a couple of organizations. So you'll get some value for yourself from it, but it's also talking about the program. So if you scan that QR code, that should actually give you, I don't know, but it should give you access to the registration form, so you can actually register for that. That's it from me. I think there's a couple of questions in the Q&A box. Anybody?
Yes, there is, Heather. There's a couple. Somebody's just said that the QR code is working, so technology does work.
Amazing. Woohoo!
Thanks, Joanne, for letting us know. So first question is from Lauren. She said, L74 guidance on health and safety first aid regulations has recently been updated. And one of the key changes is that mental health is considered in a first aid needs assessment. Is this a sign that mental health first aid is a key control measure in the UK and here to stay?
Oh, nice question, Lauren. So my understanding of that change to the first aid regulations is that it basically doesn't say mental health first aid, it says mental health training. And therefore, I don't think it is necessarily going to be mental health first aid, which is suitable for everybody. In fact, several of my customers have actually decided not to do it because they think there's risks associated with doing it. And in fact, what they've done instead is they're training everybody in an optional wellbeing conversations module, where it's basically a 2-hour course which trains them to have better conversations with someone struggling, trains anyone. So in other words, it actually democratizes that skill set, as opposed to it being the purview of a small number of individuals who actually have to, basically need role, need governance, need all of those other things, need support. So there are risks involved in bringing a mental health first aid program in, and there are benefits too, but it needs careful consideration. And it isn't the only option for sure. I don't believe it will ever be brought in as legislation, Lauren, that we have to do mental health first aid. We'd be the only country in the world to have it. And I think there was quite some strong opposition to that rule, to that idea, which came out from various bodies which are very well regarded. And so I don't think it will. I don't necessarily think it is here to stay. I think we've kind of come out the other side of it to a certain extent. John,
Okay,
I am
question, yeah.
sorry. I do not know the British Safety Council Being Well Together programme. I know Mates in Mind, but I don't know the Being Well Together programme. I will have to go and have a look at that. So I can't answer you on that one. Sorry, John.
Okay, thanks, Heather. Are there any other questions that anybody would like to put to Heather before we finish today? Nope.
Just saying perfect. Thank you, Lauren. Oh, Chris, you don't use it. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so a lot of people, my customers, are using wellbeing ambassador, wellbeing champion, and they're not using the term mental health first aid either. Or it's quite tricky because I had a couple of organizations who were very early to the party who trained anyone that wanted to be trained in mental health first aid. They just trained them in it, and then they didn't create a role. And now they don't have anybody that's actually assigned to that role, and yet it's created a bit of a muddle. So I think you just need to think about it, don't you, Chris? So I like the fact you're using a different terminology. You've obviously thought about the role, you've thought about the governance, you've thought about the support. You just need to kind of think about it properly.
Perfect.
Thanks, Trevor.
Anybody else that would like to ask a question? Get it in that Q&A box quickly. No, I think that's it for today. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the session. I certainly have. One of the great things I do in my role with IIRSM is I get to listen to all these fantastic speakers we have for our webinar. So thank you, Heather, so much for joining us this afternoon. Those of you that have said you wanted to join the Women in Health and Safety group, I'll pop your details over to Helen as well, Heather as well, if you've not emailed her already. And Chris will put you in touch as well with Heather, so you can have an ongoing conversation. So if you're a member of IIRSM, this has been recorded and it'll go on to the resource bank probably tomorrow by the time I've done my little bit with it and uploaded it. Other than that, we look forward to seeing you and welcoming you to another IIRSM webinar in the near future. Thanks again, Heather. Thanks, everybody. I hope you all have a good rest of the day. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sue. Thanks, everyone, for coming.